Good morning. Barry Bryson here, thanking you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing along the fast pace of the ministry of Jesus in Mark's Gospel in verse 21. Already, John the Baptist has come to announce Jesus coming. Jesus and was baptizing. Jesus was baptized. Jesus went into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. Jesus came out of the wilderness and called his first disciples. Now, in verse 21, he is going to enter the city of Capernaum into the synagogue there and begin to teach. I want to stop for a minute and just spend a little time talking about the synagogue and what the synagogue was, and the synagogue at Capernaum. Capernaum is the second largest town that is a Jewish town after Jerusalem, at least in Palestine. It's the second largest Jewish community. And it was very important towards the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. It was an important connector for trade, not just between Jerusalem and the rest of the world, but between Egypt and the Middle East and between Rome and the Far East. It was a very important town. Bethsaida was a small village near Capernaum that was connected to it, which was a fishing village. And Bethsaida is going to be important because it's the place where Peter, Andrew, James, and John evidently live, and so that's all in the same area. The synagogue in Capernaum is no longer standing, not the first century synagogue, but the paving stones, the floor of it's still there, made out of black basalt, I think. And you can go there. It's one of the very few places where you can go and you can stand on something and think Jesus stood right here. They'll tell you a million things are exactly that place, but in Capernaum, you actually can see the stones, the floor stones, that are the floor of the old synagogue in Capernaum. Let's talk about the synagogue just for a minute before we move on, and we'll pick up with the text again tomorrow, because we're going to run out of time to really enter into these verses today. The synagogue was a Jewish institution that was born of the Babylonian captivity. And during the Babylonian captivity, the Jews, who now were no longer idolaters and who were quite faithful to their worship of Yahweh, which we read about in the book of Daniel and the book of Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah. These were people who, while they were away from Jerusalem and could not practice Mosaic Judaism, needed to find a way to maintain their religious and cultural identity and to stay faithful to God. And so they were able to continue to keep Sabbaths and holy days, but they had to do that in a foreign land. Some really good things happened during Babylonian captivity, not the least of which was the purging out of their system of their idolatry and their Baal worship, which was the point of them going into captivity at all. But while they were in captivity, they collected the books of the Old Testament into a single scroll. That's when all that happened. When the books of Moses, the writings, the wisdom books, the history books, and the books of prophecy were collected into a single scroll. That happened during Babylonian captivity. So now you have something that you can hold in your hands and you can unroll and you can read the Old Testament. That happened during Babylonian captivity. Where would you do that? You do it at synagogue. Synagogue, the word synagogue means exactly the same thing that the word ekklesia means in Greek. I mean, literally, it's a literal translation. The Greek word ekklesia means exactly the same thing that synagogue means. But in the New Testament, ekklesia is not translated synagogue. It's translated church. And synagogue and a church are people who are congregating together. They are called to congregate together. So anyway, synagogue and church are really the same thing. Are really the same thing. Okay, so synagogues existed in every place. There were at least 10 families of Jews, 10 males, 10 Jewish males. And synagogues were cultural centers. They were places of learning and places of worship and places where people gathered together, particularly on the Sabbath. And some synagogues became very large. Synagogues in the first century had baptistries because Jews were making a significant number of Gentile converts, and they would be baptized to wash the Gentile off. We've already talked about this. So anyway, and I don't want to mislead you. The word synagogue is a Greek word, but the Jewish, the Hebrew notion is exactly the same thing that is captured in the word ecclesia. Those who have been called out, those who have been gathered together to assemble. And honestly, the synagogue service of the first century is very much like a church service that we recognize, where they're singing and teaching and preaching and ceremonial meal and all of that. We would recognize as familiar a first century synagogue service, and that's not a happenstance. That's by design. That's part of the fullness of time. It's part of God preparing the way for the gospel to spread as quickly as it did. Okay, we're going to pick back up with the text next time in verse 21, Jesus entering the synagogue. Thank you for indulging me for another 5 good minutes. Thank you so much, and we'll talk next time.